Hi everyone, thank you very much, Alexandra. And before we start, please give another very big round of applause for the amazing John Rafman.
Woo! Thank you for having me, Hans.
I'd also like to thank, of course, Steffi Czerny and also Johannes Fricke, with whom we've developed this panel in close dialogue. And yeah, I thought to begin with the beginning and ask you a question actually about how it all began. How did you come to art, or how did art come to you? How did you come to technology? How did technology come to you? Was there an initial epiphany?
Well, I wanted to be a filmmaker at first, and I did the whole film world, went to film festivals, but I never felt a community there. I was searching for something like the Nouvelle Vague, like a community of artists who I felt were responding to the times. And one day I was surfing the internet and I discovered these artists who were using the internet in a way similar to how I was using found footage in my films, who were inspired by these new vocabularies, new subcultures that were emerging with the beginning of Web 2.0. And that's kind of when I moved in the direction of more towards the fine arts and the gallery world. And it was because I really felt there was an energy, and this was in the mid-2000s. There was an energy because the internet had just truly become ubiquitous, and the art world had just begun to explore all these new languages and grammars that were emerging. And so it came out of that, and at the time, similar to maybe skate culture or other cultures, there was a culture of surfing the internet, and there was different professional surfers, and I found myself in a crew of professional surfers who took surfing the internet very seriously.
And from the beginning, you went into darker, sides of the web, we can say, and that of course also connects what we see here as a backdrop. Can you tell us a little bit about that,
Sure.
about what we see here? Because the talk is accompanied by an older piece of yours.
This is Kool-Aid Man in Second Life, and it came out at the same time that I was making my 9 Eyes of Google Street View series. So I spent my days pretty much as a virtual explorer, half the day on Google Street View, the other half on Second Life. And I think I saw in these virtual spaces a reflection of our world. In a way, they were more transparent reflections because they pointed to their own artificiality. I think in day-to-day life, we forget that we are all putting on avatars, putting on masks, and that we actually exist in all these different virtual worlds. But here, you had a reflection of that, but just pointing towards its own artificiality. And also, you had these spaces that were, especially in the case of Second Life, that were completely user-generated. And so you had these rich, the truly postmodern worlds of where you have all these different signifiers, symbols from all of history floating around together, like Las Vegas, in one giant virtual space. And I thought, in a way, it represented this world of desire, world of dreams. It showed what was lacking in our real world. And at the same time, I think there was darkness, and I would like to explore like the dark, seedy underbellies. But at this time, actually, it was more of a sort of romantic utopian search that was going on, versus now, which I think is an increasingly a darker search. But at the time, there was a kind of a joy at just the sheer act of exploration.
One of the things which also is in your work is memory. And the late Eric Hobsbawm, the historian, always said, we need to protest against forgetting. We need to explore memory in the digital age, and we are surrounded by more and more information. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have more memory. Maybe amnesia is somewhere there at the core of this digital age. And you said in a previous interview, memory is both the basis and the confirmation of selfhood, but is also unreliable. I'm interested in how self-narratives are used to construct the self, but I'm also struck by the variety of ways memory seeks the narrative form and then fails. Let's talk about memory.
Well, throughout my work, I'm exploring how technology affects consciousness, identity, personal relationships, subjectivity, and the way we construct ourselves, as I said, is through memory. So just like the photograph completely changed how we see the past, so has all these different avatars we've constructed. Imagine a millennial or the newest generation of people on the earth, how much the fact that they, from a very, very young age, have these Instagram profiles, how much that will change the way that they construct their own personal narratives. So, I mean, this is one of the central issues in my work, and I think inherently, I mean, and Germany's very aware of this, like historical consciousness, historical memory is a huge part of how we, it's just an incredibly important issue, and technology plays a huge role in that. But I mean, my thesis at the end of the day is not that technology has some outside agency that's affecting change and that we are like have no agency in the matter, it's just technology that's driving. I actually truly believe that the technologies that become the successful ones, like the photograph and the film in the 20th century, and all the various technologies that come from the internet in the 21st century, reflect transformations in society and consciousness that have already actually occurred, and in a way they're just finding their reflection or manifesting themselves in reality as those technologies. So, you know, in pre-modern times, maybe we saw swords as having inherent value and have magical powers, while in an age of the photograph, everything is just surface. Now we live in a world where there's so much information and overload, and everything's just fragmented to a point where we have so more and more data, but in a way less and less meaning. And I think that's one of the great struggles, is to fight that sort of overload, or at least make sense of it.
And you know, we spoke about the physical, you know, life, the physical dimension yesterday a lot with Katharina Grosse in relation to her work about the body, and with you. There is also a physical experience in the work involved. I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about that, and also, in a way, I was wondering if you think that instead of seeing work solely virtually kind of existing, or instead of only seeing virtual life, you know, it should be considered as leading kind of models for leading a real life. And I mean, Ben Vickers talks often about this idea of the digital, you know, the digital producing hypostitions, which then actually, you know, can produce embodied reality.
I mean, if you fall in love online, if so much of your social encounters are online, and then if you spend most of your time in front of the screen, you know, how much of your world, I mean, and you invest so much into the screen, then maybe most of your, like, the truly meaningful parts of your life are occurring in a virtual space. I think one has to take that seriously. I think it is, on one level, that is an impoverished existence. But it is the fact that even in my own childhood, I think of some of my great memories have taking place in virtual worlds, video games, you know, flirtations on ICQ, things like that. And I mean, it changes reality. But at the end of the day, we are flesh. And there is that sort of dichotomy that I like to explore, that we cannot truly yet escape our flesh and bones.
Now, earlier today, on this very stage, you know, we spoke to Professor Okomoyan and also to Samuel Ross, and both of them talked about this idea of, you know, how disciplines now come together, and in a way, I think we can only address the big topics of the 21st century, the big challenges of the 21st century, if we go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge. And you've done that in your work from the get-go, because you actually don't come from art originally, you come from philosophy, you've got a literature background, then fine art studies. Can you tell us a little bit about your way of going beyond the fear of knowledge and bringing all these knowledge forms together kind of via art?
I mean, I think I'm just more interested in speaking to a large audience and not compromising, but at the same time just not only speaking inwards towards a specialized art world audience. But I also think that my philosophical education and my artistic practice, even though they mix together, because at the end of the day, the foundations of everything are the humanities, and at least I see the world. At the end of the day, I think I'm a humanist, and a lot of those core understandings and beliefs of the world come from my humanistic education.
You've also, in terms of that, you know, outreach, I mean, Samuel Ross talked about this macro thing this morning, and you've also started to, go into the field of fashion with your, amazing Balenciaga show, and that, of course, has to do with the Samuel Ross macro, but it has also to do with something which we discussed earlier this morning, that actually, a production budget for such a show is as big as the production budget for an entire Venice Biennale. So in a way, I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about that and what it meant for you to do. Yeah.
Building off your previous point also, I think I just love the idea of being able to move between cultural spheres and building new audiences and bridging gaps between these different cultural domains. And what's amazing about high fashion is that you do get corporate budgets, and I get that it was an opportunity to be able to have a canvas that you would never able to get in an art context.
We can turn the sound of the video slightly down, just slightly, please.
This is a live performance in Second Life.
Is that good?
So yeah.
Yeah, the Balenciaga
I feel very
show.
fortunate that there's that, and I also I think nowadays especially that's needed more and more, and I think that's what I'm just amazed that doesn't actually happen more often, that people are not looking towards artists more for things that are outside the art world. So
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, John Latham says always with Barbara Stevini, every company, should not only commission artists to do things like Balenciaga did with you, but actually should have an artist in residence, or even better, have an artist on their board. So for all of those of you who have a company, that is a very strong advice.
It's true, and it really reflects in what Balenciaga is doing right now.
Can you tell us about what you did with that show? Because I think many have seen it, but it would be interesting to hear from you a bit about that project.
Actually, some of the people who helped make that happen are in the audience. Wherever you are, hi. It was very straightforward, and they gave me complete creative control. We met at Art Basel this past year, and had the idea for this tunnel. And there's not much to say except we both wanted to do something that was disorienting and transfixing, and that's kind of that was a total art experience. In a way, the total artwork. And
I got to do that.
Exactly. So that was the goal, and it happened. It was just, I think the best is when you give the artist complete creative freedom, and that's what they gave me. But yeah, I think artists, at least the artists I'm attracted to, are tapped into the zeitgeist and they're technicians of visual culture, and there's nobody who understands it better than them. So why not go to them?
And now that project is realized, as you know, I'm always interested in artists' unrealized projects. I've been collecting, archiving them for 20 years and publishing them, because I think we need to publish artists' unrealized projects in order to make them happen. DLD is a particularly fruitful context for that. I once asked on this stage Rem Koolhaas what was his unrealized project, and he said that he wanted to do a school, and someone was in the audience who then helped him do it, and that was the moment when Strelka was born, the architecture school in Moscow. So in terms of production of reality, I wanted to ask you if you had any dreams, projects which have been too big to be realized, to be too expensive to be realized.
Well, you asked me this once many years ago, and I told you I wanted to create a virtual world. And I feel like I've been trying to achieve that with another project called Dream Journal, where I basically have hired animators to construct my dreams in CG, like a cheap CG. But I think that quest continues, because until in this period I was exploring virtual worlds that existed, and I think I'm currently in the phase of wanting to actually build full virtual worlds that at the end of the day both celebrate and critique our reality and the human condition.
And who would you say helps you from the past to invent these future scenarios? I'm always interested, Panofsky said the future is invented with fragments from the past. Who are your, you should avoid the word hero or heroines because I don't like it, but who are your kind of inspirations, the oxygen from the past which feeds you?
It's endless. I mean, in the film world, it's both Chris Marker and Raine Werner Fassbinder. In art, Mike Kelly. I mean, in philosophy and theories, Walter Benjamin, and poetry, Baudelaire. So I think at the end of the day, I'm a romantic who has a deep, ironic, sensibility and playfulness. So I try to mix the two.
And can you tell us about what you're working on at the very moment? What are the next shows?
Yeah,
what are the next
I have
projects?
a bunch of exhibitions coming up. The Starship Biennial, I'm working on a part 2 to Dream Journal. But at the end of the day, I think I'm still exploring the crazy thing that is the internet and all its manifestations, and trying to make sense of it in a poetic way.
And also, I was kind of wondering actually this morning when we had coffee, how much time do you actually spend online every day?
I don't think, in all honesty, I spend more than your average office worker. I mean, your average office worker has to slave away in front of a computer. And I don't romanticize. I mean, in a way, I used to frame these journeys as searches for the virtual sublime, which I think is somewhat of a... in a way, it's a paradox, because the sublime points towards the infinite, in a way, something that can't be conceived of. You can only indirectly conceive of it. But for me, I still wonder whether you can experience that through a screen, through this heavily mediated. And the closest I've come to that, this doesn't really answer your question, but is that feeling I have when I'm surfing like places like Second Life back in the day, where you think you understand reality, and then you realize there's like a whole world inside a pin, or like inside, within a subculture, there's an entire reality. So that kind of a little bit points towards this sublime feeling that you think you understand reality, but then there's this secret giant community of furries that practice this specific type of fetish where they eat each other alive, and that they have an entire substructure. And then you've like, wow, those were the moments when I was like spending 8 hours in front of the screen, that I actually had what may be a contemporary sublime experience.
Few last questions. I was interested also, in the idea that most of your work is available for free online, and a lot of other video artists very often do not put all their work online. Sometimes it's only available, in limited editions, or of course also in terms of the art market, rarefied. Your work is in this sense, it's open source, it's accessible for everyone. And I had coffee the other day with Tim Berners-Lee, and it was very fascinating, because it's the 30th anniversary of the World Wide Web this year. It's a birthday of his inventions. And of course, Tim Berners-Lee is extremely preoccupied by the tendency, the World Wide Web is going. Particularly, he's fighting with his amazing foundation we all should support. He's fighting the potential loss of net neutrality. So I'm interested in that idea that it's a web for everyone. That this is. I mean, he said famously in the London Olympics, this is for everyone, and I believe firmly in this idea that we should make art exhibitions, that we should make art accessible for everyone. It's also why I believe deeply in free admissions in museums. We have free admission for more than 1 million visitors a year at the Serpentine galleries in London. So I'm extremely fascinated that you are one of the few artists. Sandra Perry does it as well, who really puts all the work for free online. So I wanted you to tell us about it.
That we're talking nearly right after Facebook. I see the early days when I was surfing, looking at, for example, this is a world where you can have sex with magical creatures, and as almost like medieval Paris, let's say. So if I was wandering the streets of Paris, the early days of the internet it was hard. You can easily get lost. There were winding streets, and to bring back Benjamin, in a way, the housemanization of the internet is like Facebook, building giant boulevards, crashing through the internet, and getting rid of the old medieval neighborhoods. So I do have this feeling that, in a way, I'm like Benjamin, nostalgic for the old arcades of Paris. I am nostalgic for an era where there was a more anarchic freedom. And maybe that's part of the reason why I put everything online. I also just think that in the past, maybe it was through scarcity that you built value, so that's why the older artists who don't upload their videos to the internet might feel like, it's only if you get to watch this in these very sacred spaces like the gallery does it give it value. But I think it's the opposite. The more something is memeable, the more it spreads through culture, the more cultural capital it gets, and the more it becomes a part of our society. So, but yeah, I do think that we live in a way, there is this profound yearning for a time where there was that chaos. And in a way, the trajectory in my work kind of reflects that, where in the Second Life video, like that you're seeing right now, and Google Street View, there was just this romantic quest wandering with us, and everybody there. I've really sensed a more profound idealism and utopianism during that time in my artistic communities. While now there's if anything, it's not that. The internet, which was supposed to bring us together, feels like it actually divided us and pushed us apart and created a more polarized world, more filled with deeper and deeper divisions and more hate. So I think that has to also reflect in the work.
Very last question. It's kind of like a meta interview. It's a question about an interview within the interview, because you did actually a piece which is an interview. Kool-Aid Man in Second Life, an interview with Nicholas O'Brien. And the quality of the conversation yours and O'Brien's avatar are having, it's almost like an absurd conversation. Can you tell us about that? I think it's a nice way to conclude here, the interview within the interview.
I mean, I guess this points towards like what my love of, I think what I search for and what I love about the internet is these absurd juxtapositions that you find, and that in a way I feel comfortable talking about these weighty philosophical subjects, because somehow the lightness and the playfulness of the internet allows that for me. I don't want to be this like pedantic professor, but if I feel allowed to be if I see that I'm getting fucked by a hydra, like in the last video we just saw, in a fantasy world where you can have sex with all the magical creatures, but yet wax philosophical about Walter Benjamin and Adorno. I think those are the spaces I like to try to find and create.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for John Rafman. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.